And here we are looking at John's witness and Gospel of John. We're in week 12. We're still in chapter 1, which shouldn't surprise you. But the idea here again is by really looking, we've looked at the prologue, but then this section we're in now is really a transitional into the remainder of the book. And there's some real foundational things that I want to cover. I do have a plan here for the remainder of the chapter. And it'll set a really good foundation for us when we, when I say a foundation, we're going to be seeing a lot of the same themes over and over throughout the Gospel of John. And key words will be triggered in our mind, and we'll be able to understand what John was trying to get across to his audience, of course, under the direction and inspiration of the Spirit. So anyway, that's why we're doing this. I'm going to go ahead and read through the text myself here rather than having you guys read it, because I've got a couple things I want to highlight. But John is by review from last time. This is the testimony of John, beginning at verse 19. When occasional, this is what John's testimony was, when the Jews sent to him priests and Levites from Jerusalem, and they asked him, "Who are you?" That was a big question of the time. Who is John, and what is his role? And that's, of course, main subject matter of what this beginning of the gospel is about. Who are you? And then he confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I'm not the Christ." And so we talked about that last week. They asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "No, I'm not." "Are you the prophet?" And he says, "No, I'm not the prophet." And again, they're trying to define and understand who John the Baptist is. "Then who are you, so that we may give an answer to those who sent us? What do you say about yourself?" And then that really interesting phrase, "I am not the Christ." Or no, he says, "I am a voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, as Isaiah the prophet said." And that's where we finished last week. Now then, new thought here. New thought. We could actually make that a new paragraph. Okay, that's a complete thought. And then John writes, new thought. Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. Okay, John wants the audience to know that. And they ask him this question based on that. Why then are you baptizing if you are not the Christ, nor Elijah, nor the prophet? So it's who are you and why are you doing what you are doing is really the thrust here. John answered them saying, and this is all new here, we're going to look at that this morning. "I baptize in water, but among you stands one whom you do not know. It is he who comes after me, the thong of whose sandal I am not worthy to untie." It would be similar to shoelace, I've got a little story about that too. These things took place in Bethany beyond the Jordan where John was baptizing. That, just a brief story, kind of an aside. My wife and I, years ago, spent a summer in Jerusalem. And we traveled all throughout the country. But we actually stayed in a person's missionary's home that was in the U.S. And so we had this place right in Jerusalem. And we visited several museums while we were there and so forth. But I remember one day at this museum, behind the glass was a pair of sandals that were uncovered, and they were dating back to at least New Testament times. I can't remember exactly. But it was amazing that it's the same design as we saw daily being worn in the streets of Jerusalem. We were really struck with how people wear sandals over there. It's kind of now adopted over here, the different styles, but over there, it's where I really got into wearing sandals was over in Jerusalem. And it's basically there's an ankle the way those sandals were made is there was a, through the toe, and then there was a place to tie right around the ankle to keep your sandal attached to your foot, and so that would be the thong of the sandal. So,
I've got a question. That last sentence there, it says Bethany beyond the Jordan. I assume that must be a different Bethany than the one that we're familiar with.
Yeah, we looked at that last week. There was a slide on week 11, but yeah, in the Bible map I used, it identified it. So right across the Jordan River.
Was there an effort to get there?
No. Well, from Jerusalem?
There were people going out to see John in the wilderness.
Oh yeah. Well, from Jerusalem, it sits about 3,000 feet, right, above sea level, and then right at the top there, then you start making your way down to the Jordan Rift, and about 40 miles, and you drop down to 1,200 feet below sea level. So it's a 4,200 foot descent in about 40 miles, and then then you're in the rift, and then you cross the river. And then that's right where he was. So on the Bible map, loosely is about 45 miles.
I guess you took an effort to go.
Oh, it's a climb. When you turn at Jericho, which is in the bottom of the rift, and head up to Jerusalem, it's like driving up, well, way steeper than Poudre Canyon.
But my point is, John, to go see John.
It is an effort. Yeah. So here we are. So review, what we are calling the third phase of John's witness is, first of all, introduced into the story as John's witness when the Jews came from Jerusalem to him. I'm tracking the flow of this chapter through the witnesses, the testimony of John. The first was John came to bear witness of the light, verses 4 and 5. And then John bears witness about himself that he is not the Christ, but this is the one. He introduces Jesus, and now this is the third final phase, and it'll take us through the remainder of the chapter. And so we talked about this idea of witness last week, and I kind of grappled around with it. I'm trying to understand it. We talked about it. Not real clearly though, and so I've been spending the last week thinking about how should we think about this term witness, because this term witness is going to be used throughout the text. I've been listening to the Gospel of John over and over and over again, and this word witness keeps coming up. John keeps coming up, and so why is this important? So again, what we take for granted was now being revealed to the New Testament audience. They were trying to figure out who John the Baptist is and his role in this bigger story. And then of course, as they listened to John, who is he pointing to? And that's, of course, the incarnate Word. So last week, I had you guys read out of Genesis 31, and this really helps me understand what this idea of witness is all about. A testimony, a witness. And you hikers have been out to see, hiking along, and what's this called?
Cairn.
Cairn, C-A-R-I-N. And in Genesis 31, there are reference to this covenant that Laban and Jacob made. And they set up a pile of stones like this, and they called it a heap of witness. It's a heap of witness. So it's a marker, and in the covenant with Laban and Jacob, what it represented was something that happened. It was a pointer, a physical pointer to something that occurred and should then initiate, or inform actions from there on. So it was a witness that this covenant has been made. Here is the testimony of that covenant, and so we should live our lives from here on, from this point on. This Cairn also used out hiking. When you're in an area where, like say above timberline, and it's just rock, you're scrambling somewhere, you get to one point, went to Karen, and where do you look? You look up, you're looking up, and you're saying, okay, there's one, and then I see one, and it marks your path. So in that way, a heap of witness, not only testifying to what did occur and should mark actions from there forward, but it also gives you reference to where your next step should be. So it's used as a marker, as a testimony of what is, of truth. So that image, we're going to use this image several times in this study to help us have a visual representation of what this idea is.
Would that be the same as an Ebenezer that they use?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very true. Yeah, and we see in the Old Testament, you know, like Joshua, when they crossed the river, they set up those pile of stones, one for each tribe, as a testimony of what is, of what occurred, and what should represent action from here on out. So that helped me. So again, review. Last time 19. John's witness. This is the second point, other than witness, described as occurring over 3 consecutive days. So this, my point is here, is this witness that we're going to see, this third phase, is actually occurring over 3 consecutive days. We're going to see movement in John's testifying about Jesus over a period of 3 days in the remainder of the text. So here's the first one. It's all about clarifying who Jesus Christ is. Day 1, clarifying the focus. That's the section we're going to wrap up today, 19 through 28. And then number 2 is clarifying the mission. Notice I'm tying these 3 to the word clarifying. It's all about clarification. The mission of Jesus. That's going to be introduced in the next section, of which we'll look at next time we're together. And then day 3, clarifying the calling. This is where the disciples are introduced in their calling, and we'll be looking at their calling in light of this testimony. So that's where we're headed over the next few weeks. Still in review, this is the testimony of John when the Jews came to him, "Who are you?" And the first segment of John's witness is he is clarifying focus, and he is stating, I am not the one, this is the one. And this is so critical. We're going to use this image as well, because everything in John's testimony, and I would say in the bigger picture of the story, is centering in on this one point, the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. Yes, Dave?
The 3 days that you're referencing there before, it's not coincidental that it's 3.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, 3 has a real meaning to us all.
So
Yes.
is that triangle coincidental?
Yeah, that is coincidental. Yeah, but and I'm just so taken back by this whole point of the entire Hoover Dam, which is this massive structure, is all structured out of these control points. Now, there are several at Hoover Dam, because they had to triangulate different distances and elevations and so forth. But everything rides on this. And of course, in our faith, everything rides on one control point, and it's the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but this was all new to those first century believers. So, did you have a comment? You kind of, I know you so well.
Always, but not for a while yet.
I mean, the way I can just.
I love this stuff.
So we're still in review. We're going to tie it up here. John's first interaction is to define who he is not. Get that? Who he is not. Secondly, and the task team from Jerusalem pushes him then to give us more definition. And they ask him the question, well, are you Elijah and the prophet? He says, are you the Elijah in the spirit of the Old Testament prophet who spoke saying, Shuv, return to the Lord. And then they say, no. And he says, well, then are you in the spirit of Moses, the prophet, Elijah the prophet? Are you coming in the spirit of the prophet who representing Deuteronomy in the spirit of Moses? No, I'm not that, and I'm not the Christ. Well, then who are you? So he pushes him, and then he defines himself as a voice. He's a voice, only a voice, referencing Isaiah 40 and verse 3. And that's where we left off last week.
Is that word voice the same as word, or is it a different Greek word?
I think it's a different word.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. Okay, that's a new thought. Now, audience, they've been sent by the Pharisees, and that would trigger certain, okay, we know those guys. And a big part of those guys was ceremonial purification through water. And thus, their question on baptism. And so they ask him, why then are you baptizing? If you are not the Christ, nor Elijah, nor the prophet, why are you, John, doing what you are doing? And the Pharisees were quite familiar with the ceremonial cleansing with water. Now, this is not, this is not about cleansing the dirt off your hands. This is ceremonial, representing the cleansing of sin. So, there were different methodologies in order that were approved under Pharisaical doctrine. When you were in a time, it was very important to continually wash ceremonial to remove the sin. I mean, these people this was ingrained. And so they had different methodologies. The first and the lowest level, if you don't have any water whatsoever except, a standing body of water with no movement within that water, that was level 1. In other words, if you find a standing body of water to ceremonial wash, I would imagine even a small bowl. If you didn't have anything else, you could use a small bowl. But what's better is a mikvah, and that is a ceremonial tub. And I've seen several of these archaeological sites, and there's basically what we would call, it's similar to a hot tub, but it's not a hot tub. But it's it's usually in a corner of a room and I'm sure they had exact instructions on how to build these, to be correct. They were square in a corner, and they would have a little section above the mikveh where you would immerse that was filled with water, and that water would then come out a little channel and drip down into the mikveh, thus moving water, which made it a higher level of water of cleansing, because living water, there you get Jesus' words, living water. It's moving water. So that was level 2. In your home, you could have a ceremonial washing. You just hire, Levi's mikveh company, and they come in and put this in, and you're good to go. So, but then even a higher level is to find a natural body of water where there's an inflow and an outflow, a moving and living water. And thus John is out in the Jordan River, which is a moving body of water, and there he is baptizing using level 3 of ceremonial washing, which the Pharisees would have understood. Of course, yeah. That's a high level. This guy knows what he's talking about. Although, once you see the Jordan River, you really move into disappointment. It's really like an irrigation ditch. Okay, so, verse 26, John answered them saying, I baptize in water, okay, like right here, Jordan River, but, contrast, but among you, right now, at this time in history, stands one whom you do not know. That wasn't a criticism. That wasn't a jab. It was a reality. You don't know. You're not aware. It is he who comes after me, the thong of whose sandal I am not worthy to untie. We've already talked about that. These things took place in Bethany beyond the Jordan, as Bill has referenced. So, this last text, 26 through 28, at first reading, John's response sounds enigmatic, confusing. What is he talking about here? However, within the context of what follows, John is stating that his mission is to call people to repentance and cleansing, thus using the water for sin. I'm baptized with water. But, in contrast, then he goes on to say that there is one coming. In other words, he's coming. He's here. He's in your midst, people. There is one who is here who will be calling us all of us, to a much more comprehensive, larger scope. And that's why he uses the term not worthy to untie. He is drawing a comparison here. My ministry is here, but it is nothing whatsoever compared to what is about to happen through this one individual who is in your midst, and you have not yet been introduced. So that's where we leave that text at the end there. Now, for the remainder of the time, I've moved quickly because I really would like for us to discuss this at our tables. And it's this phrase that I find so interesting from John when he's asked, "Who are you?" And John begins by defining who he is not. Fascinating. Why do you think he responded in this way? And at our stage of life, you guys talk at your table, to what degree do you think it's important to understand and even state out who you are not? When you're asked, who are you? Who am I? Well, to what degree do you think it's important to understand who you are not? Just as John defined that. We'll have fun with this. So let's do the remainder of the time at our table. I'll join one, and then we'll do that, and then we'll come back together.